Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. It's funny how we're often drawn to these stories about brilliant minds, these figures who seem to push the boundaries of creativity. But there's often a darker side to those stories, too, a threat of mental illness.
It's a fascinating and complex question that's been debated for centuries. Really, is there a link between creativity and mental illness?
Exactly. And today, we're going to dive into that very question. We're going to be looking at the book Manic Depression and Creativity to explore how manic depression, what we now call bipolar disorder, might be connected to creativity.
And what's so interesting about this book is how it jumps right into the deep end. It suggests that this whole idea of the mad genius, this connection between creativity and mental illness, it isn't just a modern idea. It's been around for centuries.
Right, like that quote from Aristotle, "No great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness." I mean, talk about a bold statement.
Yeah, that pretty much sets the stage for this whole exploration. Are these two things, creativity and mental illness, really connected?
Okay, so let's break this down. First, how do we even define genius? Is it just being really smart? Or is there more to it?
Well, the book makes the argument that genius isn't some fixed thing you're born with. It's more like a relationship between someone's abilities, the work they produce, and how society views them.
So it's not enough to just have talent, right? You have to do something with it, and people have to recognize it.
Exactly. Like, think about Emily Dickinson. She was a recluse, and most of her poems weren't published until after she died. Only then did people really understand her genius.
So it almost takes a catalyst, that moment of recognition, for someone to be considered a genius.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's like all these things coming together. Extraordinary talent, meaningful work, and then society recognizing that work.
Okay, so let's talk about manic depression. What exactly does that mean?
So today we call it bipolar disorder, and it's all about these like extreme mood swings, energy levels, and even behavior changes. Way more intense than the ups and downs we all experience.
So it's not just feeling happy one day and sad the next.
No, not at all. We're talking about extreme shifts. Like on one side, there's mania, this euphoric, energetic state where your mind's racing, you're impulsive, and you often feel, well, kind of invincible.
Sounds like in a manic phase, you might feel like you can conquer the world.
Exactly. But then there's the other side, the depression. That's when the energy crashes and you're hit with sadness, hopelessness, no motivation. Concentrating on anything is almost impossible.
So it's like a pendulum, swinging between two completely different states of being.
That's a great way to think about it. And the book digs into how both of these states, mania and depression, can affect creativity in good ways and bad.
Okay, so let's start with mania. How could that actually boost creativity?
Well, picture this. You're overflowing with energy, ideas are popping up left and right, you feel super confident. That's mania. All that energy can lead to creative bursts, taking risks, and coming up with totally unconventional ideas.
So it's like all your creative circuits are firing at once.
Precisely. Artists might work for hours and hours, just churning out work. Writers might feel unbelievably inspired, like they have to get all these ideas down.
Sounds amazing for getting stuff done.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's a downside too, right? Can mania also disrupt the creative process?
Oh, absolutely. While that manic energy can be powerful, it can also be totally chaotic. You might start a million projects but not finish any. You might take on way more than you can handle. And being impulsive, well, that can lead to some bad choices that actually hold you back.
So it's a double-edged sword, basically.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, which is tough with manic depression because it's so unpredictable.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about depression? The other side of that coin. How does that impact creativity?
Well, it can be a major roadblock. I mean, when you're struggling to even get out of bed, doubting everything you do, can't focus, trying to be creative can feel impossible.
Like hitting a creative wall, but one you just can't get past.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. You're exhausted, you're beating yourself up, you feel stuck. Not exactly the recipe for inspiration.
So does that mean depression is always bad for creativity? Always a negative?
Well, the book has an interesting take on that. It says that milder forms of depression, with all that introspection and focus on details, can actually enhance some types of creative work.
Now that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, take writers, for example. They might dive deeper into their characters' emotions, explore those nuances of human experience in a way they couldn't before. Or musicians, they might become super sensitive to the little changes in tone and rhythm, making their music, well, more melancholic and moving.
So even when you're down, there might be some creative growth happening.
It seems like it. It's about understanding that even the tough times can have a creative spark. Not about, romanticizing mental illness, but about recognizing how complex it is.
That's really important to remember. We're not saying you have to be mentally ill to be creative, or that it's something to be, like, glorified.
Right. And the book goes deeper into this whole relationship by looking at some really famous people who dealt with manic depression. People like Isaac Newton, Ludwig van Beethoven, Charles Dickens, Vincent van Gogh, just giants in their fields.
Yeah, those are some names we all know, and their stories are both fascinating and, honestly, kind of heartbreaking. Let's start with Newton, the guy who revolutionized our understanding of the universe, basically.
Yeah, Newton's brilliance is undeniable, but his life was full of these periods of isolation, paranoia, and what some historians think were manic episodes. Like, he'd get so absorbed in his work that he'd forget to eat or sleep for days.
I remember reading somewhere that he went days without food or sleep while working on his theories about gravity. That level of focus is kind of mind-blowing.
Right. It really shows how powerful his mind was, but it also makes you wonder about the role his mental state played in his discoveries.
Makes you think. Okay, so what about Beethoven? A musical genius who gave us some of the most powerful music ever written. But his life wasn't exactly a smooth symphony, was it?
Definitely not. Beethoven was known for his, let's say, colorful personality, big mood swings. And imagine the frustration of slowly losing your hearing as a composer.
That's just devastating to even think about. But he kept creating incredible music, even after he went completely deaf.
It's really a testament to his resilience and creativity. And some people think his struggles with manic depression and all those intense highs and lows actually fueled his music, gave it that emotional depth.
It's like he poured every bit of himself, the joy and the pain, into his compositions. And we still feel it today. But let's talk more about these fascinating people in part 2 of our deep dive into manic depression and creativity. We'll be back right after this break.
We'll delve deeper into their lives, their struggles, their triumphs, and how manic depression might have shaped their creative legacies. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. Before the break, we were talking about Isaac Newton and Ludwig van Beethoven, these incredible figures who achieved so much while also dealing with manic depression. So let's pick up where we left off.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that even though they both had manic depression, it showed up differently in their lives, and it probably affected their creative work in different ways too.
Right, because mental illness isn't one size fits all. It's different for everyone. Okay, so back to Newton. We were talking about his intense focus, sometimes to the point where he'd neglect his own well-being.
Totally. I mean, his ability to concentrate, to really dive deep into these complex scientific problems was unbelievable. But alongside that came the paranoia, the isolation.
So those periods of super focus might have helped him make those scientific breakthroughs, but they were also part of a darker side of his mental state.
Exactly. And it's worth thinking about how that isolation, that paranoia might have held him back sometimes too. Like maybe it made it harder for him to work with other people, to share his ideas.
It's like a constant tug of war between the good and the bad of his condition. Okay, so let's move on to Beethoven. We talk about him losing his hearing, which is just, I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been for a musician, especially a composer like him.
Oh, absolutely. The emotional turmoil, the frustration, feeling so isolated, and yet he kept going, creating some of his most powerful music during that time.
It's like his music became this way to express his pain, to kind of rise above what was happening to him physically.
A lot of music historians and psychologists think that all that emotional intensity, the highs and lows of his manic depression, really came out in his music. You can hear it, that rawness, that depth of feeling.
Like he was taking all that inner turmoil and turning it into something beautiful, almost cathartic. Okay, so besides Newton and Beethoven, the book also looks at Charles Dickens and Vincent van Gogh. I mean, talk about icons. Dickens, the literary giant, and Van Gogh, whose paintings are still just mesmerizing.
Yeah, both of them are really interesting examples of how manic depression and creativity can be intertwined. Dickens, with his crazy energy, his fascination with dark themes, his ability to create these larger-than-life characters, well, it's thought that he dealt with both manic highs and crushing lows.
You can see it in his novels, right? All those complicated plots, the social commentary, the way he explored human nature. It's a brilliant but also troubled mind at work.
Definitely. And then you have Van Gogh, who's like the classic image of the tortured artist. We know about his struggles with poverty, his mental breakdowns, his suicide, and his paintings, all those vibrant colors, the intense brushstrokes. It's like you're looking into his soul, into all that turmoil.
It's like he was pouring his heart out onto the canvas,
Mm-hmm.
using art as a way to cope with all the things haunting him.
Right. But it's super important to remember that we can't say for sure that manic depression caused their genius, or that it was the only thing driving their creativity. They were complicated people with unique talents, experiences, and struggles. But looking at how their mental health might have influenced their creative journeys, well, it gives us some valuable insights into both creativity and mental illness.
It reminds us that there aren't any easy answers. Genius and mental illness are both really complicated, and how they're related is something we're still trying to figure out. But it's easy to get caught up in these dramatic stories and forget that manic depression is a serious mental illness that needs treatment and support.
Absolutely. We can't romanticize this mad genius idea. Manic depression can be incredibly debilitating, and getting professional help is so important.
Right. There's no shame in asking for help. It's actually a sign of strength, of taking care of yourself. Now, the book doesn't just focus on the connection between manic depression and creativity. It also talks about ways to manage the disorder so you can be more balanced and productive.
And that's really important. I mean, some people might find that certain parts of their manic depression help their creativity, but those extreme swings in mood and energy can also make it really hard to work consistently and have healthy relationships.
So it's not about getting rid of those intense feelings or squashing your creative impulses. It's about learning how to handle them in a healthy way.
Exactly. The book talks a lot about self-awareness, knowing the early warning signs for both mania and depression, paying attention to how your mood, your energy levels, your sleep, even your thoughts are changing.
Like having a little internal radar, noticing those shifts so you can be ready for the rough patches.
Exactly. And once you're more aware, you can start building routines and healthy habits that help you stay more stable.
So things like getting enough sleep, eating right,
Yeah.
exercising, managing stress, those kinds of things.
Right. They might sound basic, but they can make a huge difference when it comes to managing your moods and your overall mental health. You need that solid foundation to handle the ups and downs of manic depression.
It's like building a strong base for your house so it can withstand the storms.
That's a great way to put it. And along with those healthy habits, getting professional help is often crucial. Therapy, medication, support groups, they can all give you guidance, coping skills, and a sense of community, of not being alone in this.
It's about realizing you don't have to go through this by yourself. There are people who understand and resources to help you manage your condition and live a good life.
Absolutely. And remember, finding the right treatment plan takes time. It's a journey, and you might have to try different things, make adjustments along the way, and keep talking to your doctor or a therapist.
You have to be your own advocate, figure out what works best for you.
Now, besides all the practical stuff for managing manic depression, the book also talks about finding good ways to express yourself creatively.
So it's not just about managing the condition, but also about feeding that creative spark.
Exactly. For a lot of people with manic depression, doing something creative can be really therapeutic. It gives them a sense of purpose, a way to let out their emotions, and a way to connect with others.
It's like channeling all that intense energy, the good and the bad, into something positive and beautiful.
Right. And it's about finding creative outlets that really speak to you, whether it's writing, painting, music, dance, whatever. Find something you enjoy, something that lets you explore your inner world and connect with who you really are.
It's about finding your own voice, your own way of expressing yourself.
And remember, creativity isn't just about creating masterpieces. It's about the process, the journey, and all the self-discovery that happens along the way.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our discussion, I want to go back to something we've touched on a few times, this idea of romanticizing mental illness.
Yeah, it's something we really need to be careful about. This book explores the connection between manic depression and creativity, but it's not saying that suffering is a good thing or that you have to be mentally ill to be a genius.
We've seen throughout history how this mad genius idea has been used to both praise and stigmatize people who are both incredibly creative and dealing with mental health challenges.
And it's so important to talk about this with sensitivity and understanding. Manic depression, like any mental illness, can cause a lot of pain. It's not a badge of honor, and it's not something to romanticize.
It's about seeing the humanity in people who struggle with mental health, celebrating their resilience and their creativity, while also making sure they have access to the treatment and support they need.
And it's about recognizing that creativity can exist in all kinds of people, from all walks of life, whether they have a mental illness or not.
Well said. So as we move into the final part of our deep dive into manic depression and creativity, we'll explore some of the broader implications of this connection. We'll talk more about strategies for managing mental health for creative people and leave you with some things to think about. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. We've been exploring this fascinating world of creativity and mental illness, specifically manic depression, through the book Manic Depression and Creativity. We've talked about the ups and downs, how it affects creativity, and the stories of some truly remarkable people who dealt with both genius and mental illness. So as we wrap up, I want to focus on something really practical. What can people actually do to manage manic depression?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's one thing to talk about the connection between manic depression and creativity, but it's just as important to give people some tools and strategies, especially if they're struggling with this condition.
Absolutely. So what are some of the key things the book suggests for managing manic depression, especially for creative individuals?
Well, one of the biggest things is self-awareness. Recognizing those early warning signs, both for mania and depression.
So basically knowing yourself really well, paying attention to your mood, your energy, your sleep, your thoughts, all those things.
Right. It's like having a little internal weather system. You got to know when a storm's brewing so you can prepare.
I like that analogy. So once you're more aware of what's going on inside, what's next?
Then it's about creating routines and habits that help you stay balanced and healthy.
Okay, so we're talking about the basics, right? Like getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, managing stress, all that good stuff.
Exactly. They might seem simple, but they can make a huge difference in how you feel. When you're dealing with manic depression, having that structure, that foundation is super important.
It's like creating a safe haven for yourself.
Yeah.
A place where you can be more stable.
Precisely. And while those healthy habits are really important, getting professional help is often key too. Therapy, medication, support groups, they can give you so much guidance, coping skills, and a sense of community, of knowing you're not alone in this.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that it's okay to ask for help. It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that finding the right treatment plan takes time. You might have to try different things, talk to different doctors, adjust your medications. It's a journey, not a quick fix.
You're your own best advocate, right?
Yeah.
You have to figure out what works for you.
Exactly. Now, beyond the practical strategies, the book also talks about how important it is to find healthy ways to express yourself creatively.
So it's not just about managing the condition, but also about nourishing your creative side.
Exactly. For a lot of people with manic depression, doing something creative is incredibly healing. It gives them a sense of purpose, a way to channel their emotions, and a way to connect with the world.
It's like taking all those intense feelings, the highs and the lows, and turning them into something beautiful and meaningful.
And the key is to find something that speaks to you, whether it's writing, painting, music, dance, whatever. It's about that personal connection.
Finding your own voice, your own way of expressing your unique perspective.
Exactly. And remember, creativity isn't about being perfect or creating masterpieces. It's about the process, the exploration, the journey of self-discovery.
Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to circle back to something we've touched on throughout this episode. The whole idea of romanticizing mental illness. It's something we need to be really careful about.
Absolutely. This book explores the connection, but it's not saying that suffering is good or that you have to be mentally ill to be creative.
Right. We've seen how that mad genius stereotype can be harmful, both in praising and stigmatizing people who are creative and dealing with mental health challenges.
We need to be sensitive and nuanced when we talk about this. Manic depression, like any mental illness, can be really tough to live with. It's not a badge of honor, and it's definitely not something to romanticize.
It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, recognizing their struggles and their strengths, and making sure everyone has access to the help they need.
And it's about recognizing that creativity can come from anywhere, from anyone, regardless of their mental health.
So well said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into manic depression and creativity. I hope you've all learned something new, gained a better understanding of this complex topic, and maybe even felt inspired to explore your own creativity.
It's been a great conversation, and I hope our listeners will continue to learn and talk about these important issues.
If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please don't hesitate to reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to go through this alone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep taking care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for listening to the Mad Genius Thesis.